Hello, my name is Jae Wilson from Onyx Reporting. You can reach me at my website, onyxreporting.com, or just email me at the address above. In this little webinar, I'm going to talk a little bit about Jet Enterprise, measures, and business functions. For those of you who aren't in the know, business functions are actually available to you for free if you've bought and installed Jet Enterprise. You can download it from the Jet Reports website. I will go through the process of how to download and install the content in the next webinar. But in this webinar, I really just wanted to take a minute to talk about measures and what they look like, how they work in our cubes. Okay, so in the grand scheme of life, a measure is a calculation. It's a calculated field like profit margin, sales amount, cost amount, daily sales. These are all different measures. In the grand scheme of life, there are three types of measures: standard, derived, and calculated. Those are the measures. Now, why do we have business functions? If we've got measures, what's special about the business function library? Well, the business function library allows you to rapidly implement parameterized measures that have logic built into them. So things like ratios. When you want to calculate profit margin percent, when you're working with ratios in particular, the fact that they're parameterized and predefined is really important. It can save you some heartache when you're wondering, oh, why is my calculated measure not working? Additionally, the function library gives you access to a wider array of calculated measures that you wouldn't have access to if you didn't already know MDX. So what is this MDX business? Well, Jet Enterprise, the great thing about it is it builds cubes. The cubes are hosted in Microsoft SQL Analysis Services. And Analysis Services allows you to use MDX as a means of querying the cube and extracting your data, which is great if you know MDX, but let's be honest, a lot of our customers, a lot of the users of Jet Enterprise don't have talent in-house that are knowledgeable or proficient in MDX. So having the business library available to you where it's all predefined is actually quite excellent. So let's take a minute and talk about our three types of measures: standard, derived, and calculated. A standard measure is a measure that's based off of math on one field in a table. So if you imagine your sales transaction table, well, if I want to know what total sales are for, let's say, across months, well, total sales is the sum of a field on the fact table called sales amount. And similarly, if I want to have a measure in my pivot table for cost, I have to have a measure defined in my cubes, and that measure is going to be the sum of a field called cost amount. And that, again, is an example of a standard measure. Now, a derived measure is a measure based off of two measures from the same fact table. So I have sales, I have cost, I want profit margin. What is profit margin? Well, profit margin is just sales minus cost. Okay, and how do I define profit margin? Profit margin, like I just said, sales minus cost. We pull it through. Life is grand. We have profit margin. That is an example of a derived measure. It's based off of two measures in the same fact table. Now, a calculated measure, this is a little bit challenging to explain and understand. A calculated measure is a measure that's calculated at runtime. It sounds like jargon to me, so what does that mean? It means that a calculated measure is a question that you cannot know the answer to until you have posed the question. So a measure like profit margin year to date, this is a classic example. You can't know what year to date is until you tell me, well, what date are you looking at? Are you looking at what was profit margin year to date, and the date is January 15, or is the date March 31st? I cannot know the answer to the question until you define the question. Similarly, for measures like previous year to date or percent change, right? A lot of times when you're talking about time-based measures, they're calculated, and they are calculated at runtime. Okay. So that's the bit on calculated measures. Now, getting back to our business library. I mentioned that we'll use our business library for ratios. Okay, talk to me about ratios. Let's consider profit margin percent. What is profit margin percent? Well, profit margin percent is sales minus cost divided by cost. That's fantastic. I pull it through. Oh, sorry, grabbed the wrong one. Sales minus cost divided by cost. Okay, I pull it through. It works famously until I get to the last measure. And why did it break? Well, cost is 0, and you can never divide by 0. You get a div 0 error. Now, those of us building calculated measures in the Jet Data Manager, we might forget about the possibility that the denominator might be 0. And that's why it's nice to have a predefined parameterized measure in our business library that takes care of it. Effectively, what you get in the business library when you use division is it will say, okay, if the divisor doesn't equal 0, then give me sales minus cost divided by cost. And if this is true, then return null, or blank in this case. Of course, I have to fix up my parentheses. Okay, pull this guy through, and we're off to the races. Instead of giving a div 0 error, it's got logic built into it, and so I avoid that problem. All right, let's take a look at the Jet Data Manager. Here in the Jet Data Manager, when I right-click in my cubes, well, let me just show you where we're at. I'm on the Cubes tab. I'm looking at the Finance cube. I expand the Measures node. I right-click Measures, and you can see, it's really easy to add a standard or derived or a calculated measure. And if you have business functions installed, you have access to all of these predefined measures that you can now add to your project. If I take a look at the math division measure, you can see here we've got an if statement built into it. If b has a value, then give me a divided by b, else return null. It is parameterized insofar as I can go in and I can choose what I'm dividing by as predefined measures. Okay. Let's take a look at a time-based measure. I'll look at year-to-date. And just because this might be a little bit difficult to read, I'm going to copy this syntax and paste it here into Excel. And make it a little bit larger. This is a syntax you have to start getting into if you're going to use MDX. And again, I would suggest that there's more people that know SQL than MDX, and in-house, who knows what resources you have. So it's a lot easier to just go into a function and say, oh yeah, I want to choose the time dimension. Move this up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to use the date dimension, and then I'm going to grab my measure budget, and boom, it's done. And again, that's part of the joy of using the business function library, which is all predefined. My name's Jae Wilson. You can reach me at j@onyxreporting.com. In this little webinar, we talked about the 3 different types of measures. In our next webinar, I'm going to show you how to install your business functions and use the business functions. Thanks for joining us.